We're talking about doxa these days. It's a word we don't use very often, doxa. Talked about this last week and set up the series, which is doxa is the glory of God, and how when we worship God, we are being ushered back into this place of glorifying and praising the wonderful attributes of our good God, doxa. And what we're doing over the course of this series is we're going to reclaim the heart of worship. Reclaim the heart of what our worship services are attempting to do. And we're going to talk about a lot of things over the coming months. But today is one of the introductory concepts that has to be primary. Absolutely primary. And it's because if you're going to talk about worship, you have to eventually talk about what pleases God. If we're here to offer something to God and we're engaging in this audacious task that a bunch of numbskulls like us, and guess what, you're one of them, come into a room like this and think we have anything to offer the God of the universe who has created all space and time and people, who are we kidding? Right? But there's something amazing that God wants and invites us to offer and to give back to God in worship. And so the key question is, if God is the object of our praise, if he's the object and we want to magnify Christ, then it's crucial that we understand what God delights in. What is it that God likes? No doubt you're familiar with these words. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Some of us know this reference primarily because of its use in a very famous speech by Martin Luther King, right? But these words, let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. We've heard these words from speeches to Facebook posts on certain holidays, you name it. But the context may surprise you. It comes from Amos chapter 5, and God has a bone to pick, and it concerns their worship. Okay? This is going to be one of those days where we're just going to put on that spiritual seatbelt, and we're just going to prepare for a hard word. This is not a passage that's easy. Okay? It's going to hit every one of us at some level if we're willing to receive it. Deal? Deal? Okay. Imagine that you suddenly got a job change or a family dynamic that occurred and you have to move out of state. You're going to a new city, a new neighborhood, a new place. And you arrive there and you have to find not just a home to live in, or maybe to purchase a home or rent an apartment or rent a house, but you've got to find out all the rhythms that you formerly knew in your home city, like finding a grocery store and the basics. But then, eventually, one of the key aspects of your move would be to find a church. You think about the radius of your neighborhood and where you're going to go and what kind of church you're drawn to, and maybe it's going to look a whole lot like UPBC, who knows. But you finally come upon a church, and you're like, man, this is a great place. The building is attractive. They take care of their spaces, which, by the way, that's a big sign of someone taking seriously their mission and vision, right? And they sing hymns and songs that are rich and singable. And there's beautiful instrumental music that's offered, right? And the sermons are relatable, and people seem to be giving generously during the offering time. And not only is there energy and excitement on Sundays, but the people are friendly and welcoming. And you'd think, this is amazing. These people know how to worship. Maybe not. Because Amos is going to pull back the veil for us. Just because it looks like worship to God doesn't mean it's pleasing to God. Did you hear that? Just because it looks like worship to God doesn't mean it's pleasing to God. In fact, it might be a worship service that God hates. Now, hate is a strong word. Rarely does the Bible say that God hates something, but that's the word God uses today when it comes through the prophet Amos to the worshipers of that time. Okay? Starting with verse 21, chapter 5. Let's read these words. I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. And then verse 24. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Okay, let's stop there for a second. A little bit of a recap so far. God looks at their worship service and says, I hate, I will not accept, something smells funky, I will not listen, away with. Now, this is surprising, isn't it? Because, doesn't God say and command for his people to come and worship him? Whole chapters of the Bible spell out how to bring God offerings. And it says they're bringing good offerings. They're bringing the best of their gifts and their first fruits. Right? Psalm after psalm says, come, let's worship with joy to the Lord, right? And now God is saying to them, although you're doing all those things, it isn't working for me at all. What's going on here? Okay, here's the painful truth. The painful truth, friends, is it's totally possible for people to think they're worshiping God when they're not. Let me say that again. It's totally possible for people to think they're worshiping God when they're not. We can think we're pleasing God when we're actually not. How can I say that? Because that's what was happening with these people. This is what was happening with the people of Israel, the Jews at that time. And it pains me to say this, but this is a reality for all of us, myself included. I don't know about you. I don't ever want to worship service or offer worship to God that God would reject. Do you? I don't want to be a part of a church that does that. We spend a lot of time and energy to plan services, and we have musicians who come and rehearse throughout the week, and we have choirs, and we have pastors and liturgists who prepare their thoughts and sermons, and they do hours and hours of work to prepare worship so that we can all contribute and give something to God, right? This isn't entertainment. This isn't a concert. This is a worship service where we're offering something to God. So it would be awful to think that what we've prepared and done, all of this work, even the sacrificial gifts and offerings that we give towards the church, that would be rejected. We want to please God with our worship, no? How can we make sure that we are bringing God worship that delights in him and gives him joy? And that he feels good about what we're offering. Okay. Well, the prophet Amos tells us how. And he tells us what God is looking for in our worship. And I'm going to get ahead of our passage a little bit, but the first thing that he's looking for in our worship is that God is pleased by our worship when we worship him alone. Now, that may seem on the surface like, well, duh. Let's get a little further into it, okay? Listen to what he says in verse 25. Did you bring me sacrifices and offerings 40 years in the wilderness, people of Israel? This is a rhetorical question. 26. You have lifted up the shrine of your king, the pedestal of your idols, the star of your God, which you have made for yourselves. Okay, there's a lot there. We're going to unpack this, okay? Because this is so rich, but also, ouch, just wait, okay? You've lifted up the shrine of your king, lowercase k, right? You see that? The pedestal of your idols, and the star of your God. What does that mean? Right? But he begins it with this phrase that, like, did you bring me sacrifices and offerings 40 years in the wilderness, people of Israel? Well, of course they did. In fact, they had a traveling sanctuary called the tabernacle, and they worshiped God in that space. And they brought it with them everywhere they went, right? So they worshiped God. We know that happened. But what God knows the whole time is that during that 40 years, their hearts were also serving pagan gods, other gods. In fact, the two gods that you can just reference in this, one is called Sekuth, and he was referred to as the king god, lowercase k. And then Kaiwan, your star god, and the images you made yourself, graven images, they would form images to reference these two pagan gods. Sekuth was the Assyrian god connected with the planet Saturn, and it was a bright dot in the sky, and they could see it at night. passing above them, and they would worship that dot. And then in addition, Kaiwan was the nickname for the star god. So 2 stars in the sky, a planet and a star. Okay? And so God's people look like they're worshiping God in the tabernacle, the one true God, but they're also worshiping these other gods. Okay? And God will not accept that. God is pleased by our worship when we worship Him alone, God alone. Okay? Now, I want to talk about something here that it helps bring this home, because we're familiar with something, especially in the New Testament, of something called polytheism. Polytheism is just the worship of many gods. And in the Greek culture, and particularly in the New Testament world and the ancient Near East, it was practiced that you would go to various temples for different kinds of gods, and you would worship them kind of equally. And some, maybe Artemis, would get more worship than others. But you'd go to these temples and you worship multiple gods. Depending if you needed a harvest or if you needed to have a child, you'd go to different, like a fertility goddess, for instance, and you just go to these different temples and you'd worship multiple gods, okay? That was common in that day in the pagan religions. But then, what's going on for these worshipers was they were called to something that's not polytheism, but monotheism. That is the worship of God alone, one God. That's the Jewish understanding of God before Christ, okay? Now, what's going on for these worshipers in Amos's day, and also what's most popular in our day, is something that we don't recognize but happens all the time, and it's called henotheism. Henotheism. With henotheism, you have one main God, Yahweh, the God of the Scriptures, Christ alone, right? But you also have these other little gods that you kind of attend to, and it's not God alone, it's God plus, okay? I'm gonna follow moon energy, and I'm gonna have crystals on my windowsill, and I let them charge by the moonlight. I'm gonna have angel cards, or I'm gonna follow the zodiac signs. Okay, that's henotheism. It happens all the time. I actually see this in our church a lot with members who just, you kind of see it within social media sometimes as people get caught up in it. Okay. Henotheism is attributing any divine attribute or power to something that is other than God. Okay? Henotheism happens all over the place. But henotheism, that is easy. If you want to talk about angel cards and zodiac signs and, crystals, that is nothing compared to then the pedestals that we bring into worship, where we prop up certain things in our lives that we don't think it's possible to flourish without them. And a lot of times that can be found in everything from propping up political powers or secular mindsets or ideologies. Henotheism. It's the henotheism of our day when we profess the lordship of Jesus on Sunday and then we put our hope in anything else Monday through Saturday. Are you with me? That's I don't like this. Can we get to the funny part or something fun? Like, guys, this is the thing. There's not a single person in this room who's not at some point affected by the phenomenon of henotheism. Anytime we think in our heads, I can't imagine life without that, it might be a pedestal. That's what God's calling out. It can be any attachment or agreement that we have made with lowercase kings and star gods. God is saying He's pleased with our worship when we give up our henotheism, these lesser, small things to which we worship. And then we come to Him, and with our hearts we say, I worship You, Lord, and I worship You alone. And I want to turn away and I want to leave behind those other attachments that compete with You. The Old Testament form of idolatry was actually fairly easy, at least in one sense, in that they would carve images, and so they had carved images of Sekuth and Kaiwan, and they'd carry them in their pockets, or they'd have them in their personal belongings, or sometimes they'd even bring it with them in the temple, or they'd have places to which they would just give a little bit of worship offering to those gods. That's a little bit easier objective to see. But the problem for you and me is the idols in our lives are often so much more subtle than that. The idols in our lives can look like something really good, something that I want, that everyone would want. but then I turn it into something to which I believe I can't flourish without it, okay? Things like attention from others, which is what much of social media has become. And it's okay to want to share a bit of your life and attention, but then we know in this selfie culture and the obsession with, people who prop their phones up and film themselves in everyday life experiences, but what you really know is they had to spend hours curating the video to project a certain moment or lifestyle or experience. And they've made it not more just attention to themselves for the sake of sharing with others, but now it's a never-ending need and satiated desire. It's not never satiated desire to receive energy from other people, right? It can be anything. It can be our health, an obsession with things that are good, that are wonderful, but take it too far, and it becomes a pedestal. Okay? And within our subconscious is this attachment of how would I ever get by without that? And then life has a way of bumping into my idol and making it wobble, and when I see it threatened, I freak out. And I even get mad at God if he was to possibly fiddle with it. Okay? And it's at that moment that you and I have a choice. Are we going to let go of that other security that's trying to tell us that we need it, that as long as you have me, life will be okay, and instead worship God alone? This is why giving up our idols is so hard. It requires something that feels like death. And it turns out that following God is really just the lifelong process of letting other things go until we stand alone before God and say, only you will I praise. So here's one of the questions for this series as we move forward. If we want to reclaim the heart of worship, if we want to experience God not only to experience pleasure and delight in our worship, but also to receive something from him, the question is, are you willing to let go of the idols when you become aware of them? Am I willing to do that? How many times you checked your phone for the fantasy football score from the beginning of this sermon? How many times have you looked at your phone? I know some of the dudes in this room. I know some of our tendencies and habits, attachments. April and I have talked a lot about something I'm aware of is my attachment to my phone. We talked about getting rid of social media altogether. Just getting off, right? When you become aware of the idols, and you become aware of them, are you willing to let them go? Because part of reclaiming the heart of worship, and God is asking us, is that I want you to worship me and me alone. And what attachments, as healthy or good as they may even be, have taken up inordinate place in your life, right? And here's a pearl of wisdom, is that part of reclaiming the heart of worship away from the false idols, the star gods, the pedestals, the lowercase k kings, is to get back to the heart of worship, which is simply this: delighting in God. When is the last time you delighted in the Lord? Delighting in God. Now, I'm very much aware that some of our upbringings, depending on your tradition, is that you never learned this. We've learned in some traditions, I know especially for those who are maybe recovering Catholics or maybe come from a little bit more high church Orthodox traditions, is you were taught to give honor and reverence to God. Not a bad thing. But the subtle lie underneath that was that you also are to keep an arm's length distance from the Lord, right? And the idea that you would even enjoy the Lord seems indecent. You were supposed to fear the Lord, right? Some other traditions maybe make it too friendly and we don't have awe and reverence. But the point I'm trying to get at is that God actually in the Scriptures is asking us to delight in him. That's one of his chief desires. So the real question is, do you enjoy God? Do you enjoy God? If there's no enjoyment there'll be no praise. And if you can't praise, then you're just going to walk into this space or any church space carrying a U-Haul full of idols and lowercase kings and star gods that are part of your baggage. And you'll never leave the room having an experience, an authentic encounter with God if you can't delight in him. Where's the delight? You can say words, you can sing songs, but there'll be no praise there because praise comes when you delight. We know this because you know who we naturally delight in our lives? Our children, our grandchildren. Yeah. These little people who destroy our homes, right? But they're made in our image. They're made in our image, and there's nothing a parent longs for, especially when you get into the little bit more later adolescence or adult years. There's nothing more that a parent wants than to have their children still delight in them. Just like God wants us to delight in him, right? So we do this with our children. Our children can do all sorts of crazy things that are frustrating and hard, but we delight in them. These little people that look like us. Praise overflows when there's delight in the heart. Maybe part of your task for reclaiming the heart of worship is just how do you this week, how do you in your life choose to reclaim the delight in God? I had something experience this week where I was walking into the office, and it was the sun was coming up. It was a beautiful morning. It was crisp, these crisp fall days. And I remember just thinking to myself, Lord, I'm so thankful for what you've given us and given me. It was just a little moment of delight, but it was like a little bookmark in my day. And that's what awareness of spiritual realities about God's presence and goodness, that's what it affords us and does for us, is it helps us towards a little moment of worship as I'm walking into work. When's the last time you worshiped on your way into work? Right? And we Presbyterians have this wonderful catechism. Catechism is it's a confessional statement that we believe to be true. And part of this is theological statements that we believe capture a whole lot of the scriptures. And the first question in this amazing catechism in our Presbyterian tradition is, what is the chief end of man? Okay, now on that day, we didn't have changing language. What's the chief end of humanity, of both men and women, all people made in the image of God? And the answer is the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And some of us have stopped at the glorify God part. But you know that the task and the goal, what God wants for us is for us to enjoy him forever, to delight, to enjoy him forever. It couldn't be said better, because to glorify God rightly would certainly be to enjoy him. So do you enjoy God? If we're going to worship God alone, and that's what God asks of us in our worship, it's going to start with taking delight in God. Okay? The second thing that Amos tells us the Lord is looking for in our worship is something many of us don't naturally think of, but is oh so important, and that is that God is pleased by our worship when we care for those who have less. God is pleased by our worship when we care for those who have less. This second quality of what pleases the Lord's heart and makes him happy with our worship comes from verse 24. It's some most famous words that Amos ever spoke. Let's go back to it. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. We know this because of the repeated speech that Martin Luther King gave that used these words from Amos. But there's a Middle Eastern image here that we often lose. And that is that in the Middle East, there are dry riverbeds called wadis that are dry most of the year. And then the rains come, they fill up, and then they lower. So when they fill up, everybody runs, grabs water, and then they lower. Okay? But God is saying, I don't want to see a wadi of justice just once in a while, or every once in a while. I want to see an endless river of justice. That's God's heart. That's what he wants to see in his people. God is pleased by our worship when we care for those who have less. Amos speaks to people who aren't doing that. Amos 6:1, in fact, gives us a little bit of image, a peek into the kind of lifestyles they're living. Amos 6:1 says, "What sorrow awaits you who lounge in luxury in Jerusalem, and you who feel secure in Samaria? You are famous and popular in Israel," he says. So these are people that are not unlike us, dear friends, because we in this room, we know something of luxury. You travel anywhere in the world, you come back to our setting, and you find out real quick how luxurious even our infrastructure, our streets, our cities, all the things that are offered to us, okay? But some of us really know luxury and security. We know what it's like to sit in a comfortable seat on an airplane. You know what I'm talking about, right? We know what it's like to go to a restaurant and not worry about the bill at the end of the night because you got it covered, okay? We know security. We know comfort. But what they don't have, Amos tells us, is a concern for the poor. And as Amos says in verse 6, you care nothing about the ruin of your nation while you drink choice wine. Their money, not a bad thing, but their money is being spent on excess. The elegant, in fact, he even goes on to say the elegant furniture that's carved and inlaid with ivory, vintage wine, not by the glass, he says, but by the carafe. Meanwhile, the poor among you are being neglected. And he says, you continue like this, you're just going to be, taken, you're going to be experiencing my judgment and the nation coming down. And that's exactly what happened. Okay? So God is telling us through Amos that God is pleased with our worship when we let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And here's where I want to stop and affirm us as a church, and affirm you, UPBC. In just the past few years, you are a church that embodies so much of trying to make some things right in our city and in our world. Some small ways, some really spectacular ways, like the education and support to children in Meru, Kenya, where we have, over the last 20-some years, invested in a community there, and well over 500 kids have graduated high school because of the support of UPBC. Just this last month, you helped hundreds of school supply backpacks to be given to children in our city who had need. And you have partnered. We as a church, we birthed and imagined this ministry that then became a nonprofit. It's on our campus called Families Unlimited Network. I just heard from their one of their publications this last year. They served 40,000 people this last year. Yeah. Hey, friends, we spend more in those endeavors as a church than we do on this platform, and that's a good thing, right? And don't say that to be like puffed up or arrogant, but that's one of my measures of a church that's healthy is like, do you spend more on your platform entertaining your people, or do you spend more on blessing your city and blessing those outside the walls of your church? Because that's a justice-seeking church. And I could go on and on. I could talk for so much longer about all the ways that this church expresses justice. And justice doesn't have to look like the dramatic things you see in the culture. Sometimes justice is literally just befriending someone who's lonely or reaching out to someone who feels like they're on the outside and bringing them in. And that's part of our righteousness. But when God sees your heart, UPBC, it should encourage you to know that God is pleased by our worship when we care for those who have less. God is pleased. Let me close this by just saying what Amos is getting at here in chapter 5 is there's two problems. There's idolatry and there's injustice. And God sees those and he calls those out. And Jesus gives us the solution to these. Christ's mandate for those of us who are followers of Jesus is that when it comes to idolatry, I want you to focus your energy on worshiping God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength, your whole being, God and God alone. And then on the other side of the equation, he says, and now I want you to love your neighbor as yourself, and that's the starting place of justice. By the way, most justice in our day when it's spoken of is actually, I'm going to get in trouble if I say this too much, too hard. It's corrupted. It's actually not justice-seeking, it's self-righteous, not righteous. I'm seeking justice for others out of a self-righteous posture because I believe my ideology is more important than yours, and so I'm going to enforce that on you. And it's not justice in the sense of trying to make whole what's been broken. It's just the rage machine creating more brokenness. And it's demonizing others, and it's not seeking out something of the wholeness and shalom of God. It's self-righteous, and it demonizes others that are made in the image of God. Okay, that's not justice. That's not God's justice. God's justice is for the family to be made whole, which means you can't demonize others. You have to love them. You have to be patient. You have to practice the Holy Spirit gift of forbearance. When's the last time you saw that in our culture? Right? And so Jesus says, I want you to love God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and I want you to love your neighbor as yourself. And that's the starting place of justice that'll roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. To defeat both those things, we need the great commandments to help us. And this is my heart for UPC and for God, because this is the thing, is we can, in our culture, we can be swept into a different water. Instead of just God's justice rolling down like waters, we can just sow division and contribute towards the rage machine. We can get swept into those waters. And many people do. And instead of righteousness like a mighty stream, it's self-righteousness. Loving others is not just a bumper sticker that Jesus has given us. It's the hope of the world. To love God and love our neighbor. And may it be that God will say of UPBC, I love your religious festivals and solemn assemblies. I will accept your offerings. I hear and I delight in your hymns of praise. Thanks be to God.